We're live.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this morning's Curriculum Committee working session of the Board of Education. This morning, we're going to be discussing instruction. As we said in the last meeting, and with credit going to Dr. Mioli for this, we're getting back to the basics. Last session, we discussed curriculum. This morning, we're discussing instruction. And as you might guess, our next session is going to be on assessment. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mioli, who has several educators here with us to get into the details of this topic. We will be open for community comments and questions. If you have any, as you are listening to this and watching this, you're welcome to email the board at boe@portnet.org. I will be monitoring the email and we will read your comments or questions in and get them answered today. And with that, Dr. Mioli, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask President Johnson to do the pledge, I think. If everyone would stand.
Hey guys, on 3. 1, 2, 3. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all. Thank you.
Dr. Mioli, we also need to do attendance.
And now we will do attendance.
See, I forgot about everything this morning.
Callahan is not here, so I think we may be here for a while.
I can do it. Am I allowed to
actually, isn't Pat doing the minutes? I think Pat should
okay.
or I think Rachel maybe just go through, because I don't know that Pat knows all of the board members that are present. If you could just do the board member attendance.
So board members that are present. Okay. Can I do that, or do we need to? All right. Everybody say here when I say your name. I'm here, Rachel Gilliar. Larry Greenstein.
Here.
Deborah Brooks.
Here.
Emily Bays.
Here.
Nora Johnson.
Here.
Julie Epstein.
Here.
And Beth Weisbird is not here this morning. All right, Dave, back to you now. Doctor.
All right. Thank you for having us. We have a great team of teachers here to help me present today. And I want to make sure that the audience knows that the real title of this presentation is The Art and Science of Instruction, because I'm going to keep coming back to that word many times today. As Ms. Gilliar said, last month we talked about curriculum, and that is the school district's formal plan to fulfill its mission statement and expectations for student learning. And this month we want to talk about instruction, how that curriculum is delivered. So if we could get the PowerPoint put up, please. Thank you. And you can go to the next slide. There's our stellar panel. We'll introduce everybody as we go. You can go to the next slide. All right. As Ms. Gilliar said, we also will be following up with assessment. And I just want to remind everyone again that there are a lot of connections among these three educational items. But I thought it was really important for us to look at each individually, and especially in light of our impending work on mission and vision and the 5-year strategic plan in Port Washington. Next. So what is instruction? For those of you with young children, probably your 3 least favorite words are some assembly required. Because you know that if you buy something and it requires assembly, you're going to have instructions. And of course, instruction comes from that root. And I think, as I spoke about with curriculum, it's probably not the best way to describe what we do in schools, But nonetheless, instruction has a lot to do with giving instructions, direct instruction to students, but it's a lot more, as I think you all know, and as we're going to see with some of our examples today. So it is the delivery of the curriculum that we talked about last month, and it's teaching. Instruction is really about teaching and learning, and I'll elaborate on that as we go. And I did steal the title of this from Bob Marzano, so I have to give him credit. All right, next slide. So what does instruction look like? It looks like lots of different things. We have Socrates over there in the corner doing his Socratic method, although I don't think he called it that. We have some manipulatives on the upper left, small group and large group on the bottom. So, you know, instruction looks like all of these things. We've been doing a lot of talking about instruction publicly because of our pivots to remote and all of our talking about how to deliver instruction during a pandemic. So I know that this has been in the public eye more than it normally is, and I think that's a good thing. There's lots of different ways to deliver instruction, and really they're all important depending on the cohort of students that one has in front of one. Next slide. And what should instruction be? Mostly we do discipline-based instruction in our schools, but we're going to talk about integration today. There are some schools, some districts, some departments that do theme-based. Sometimes teachers use a theme to bring educational concepts together. There's lots of talk about interest-based, student choice, play-based, the Montessori method, and of course, you know, how do we accommodate different student needs? Tracking, differentiation, individualization. And again, the answer to what should instruction be is all of those things, not all at the same time, but based on the cohort of students that one has in front of one. And again, that's where the art of instruction comes in. Next slide. Next slide, please. John, can you get us the next slide? Or am I frozen?
I think you're frozen.
Okay, let's see. So I'm gonna, can you hear me?
You're not frozen for me.
Oh, okay.
Your screen might be frozen, but we hear you.
Okay. So can we go back one? There we go. Okay. So just as I spoke about in curriculum, you know, I talked about what curriculum was and what it is not. I want to make sure that I also say what instruction is not. We do a lot of talking about standards. When Common Core came in, that's all we were talking about. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that standards are not lesson plans. Standards do not make for instruction. They help instruction, but they're just really a list of ingredients that go into instruction. And so a nice metaphor for that is these ingredients that we have here. A number of chefs could use those ingredients to make a lot of different kinds of meals, again, depending on who we serve. And then the next slide. John, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
We hear you, Dr. Maley. We're on the try driving this.
Really?
Yeah, that's what we see. Mm-hmm.
Now I have two frozen screens. Wow, that's really weird. I'm afraid to go out and come back in. All right, there I see it. Well, the timing didn't work the way I wanted to, but try driving this is what I wanted you to see. The standards are all those little pieces, but that's not instruction. You can't drive instruction based on the standards. You can use them, but not drive it. All right, next slide. Oh, I'm back. Okay. So I want to talk about just a little bit best practices in instruction, and talk about a couple of people who do this for a living and have helped us to understand what best practice is. So next slide. Boy, I'm really having some issues with the internet here. Sorry. Is the next slide up with the Danielson rubric?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So what you see in front of you, and I don't, is it's the rubric by Charlotte Danielson that kind of encompasses best practice of instruction in one page. There's a lot embedded in there. We could do probably 2 days just on this. But this is the framework by which teachers in our district are evaluated. There are a number of rubrics like this. And I put it up there just because it's kind of what we call a placemat of best practice in instruction. And briefly, there are 4 domains: planning and preparation. So obviously good instruction starts with good planning and good preparation, knowing students, knowing pedagogy. Domain 2 is the classroom environment. And you're going to hear a lot of talk about that. Student behavior, classroom procedures, establishing a culture for learning or a climate or atmosphere. Domain 3 is about instruction itself, communicating with students, engaging the students. There are a number of elements there. I won't go through all of them. And the 4th is just professional responsibilities. So that's kind of the small universe of important things in instruction. And I wanted to just share that for those of you who haven't seen this before. Next slide. So John Hattie has done some really great work. And what he did was he has been doing for actually quite some time is taking a number of studies, educational studies, and doing meta-analyses on them. So seeing what they have in common. And so what he reports is influences on student achievement. So if I go back to that second slide where I defined instruction and we talked about not only teaching, but learning, obviously, if we're doing good teaching, the students are learning. And so student achievement and influences on student achievement are really important to study. And what I wanted to show here is something that most people don't think about when you think about instruction. And that is teacher efficacy. And that's a big word. I put the definitions over there on the left-hand corner. What it means is that the teachers believe that his or her capabilities to bring about those desired student achievement pieces will happen regardless of the students that they have in front of them, regardless of whether they are difficult or unmotivated or whatever. And as you can see at the top, these are effect sizes. So a 1.57 effect size is huge. It really makes a difference. Second, that I highlighted is student efficacy. It's the same concept, but it means that the students believe that they can succeed. And then the third one that I highlighted down is teacher-student relationships. Our first curriculum committee meeting was all about social emotional learning. And recently, within the last 5 or 10 years, we've talked about social emotional learning as a kind of a separate thing. But it's always been part of really good, really effective instruction. And so, I just want to paint that picture. When teachers believe that all students can learn, they really believe it, and they believe they can make a difference. When students believe that of themselves, and when the teachers and students have great relationships, those are 3 of the top 10, influences on student achievement. Not something that we talk about a lot when we talk about instruction, but obviously vitally important.
Excuse me, is it okay if I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. And you might have said this. Student expectations, is that students' expectations of themselves or the teachers' expectations of students?
The latter in this case. So
And
holding high expectations for students.
And when is Hattie, I know we're still using it as a, as a benchmark or whatever, or as a tool, but when did Hattie write this? What, what years about? Is this like 10 years old, 20 years old?
No. He has been updating this regularly. I want to say like every 2 years, and
Okay.
but I'm not sure if this is the very latest one, but it's certainly within the last 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's fine for me. That's close enough for me. I just was
Okay.
trying to put it in context. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No problem. And feel free to interrupt at least me, although I'm almost done. Next slide. So this is the money slide. I think the last one was for me, but this one I think is really important for understanding instruction. No matter where you are, no matter what country you're in, no matter what decade you're in, these are the important things, when you're a teacher that you need to think about for instruction. One, obviously, is meeting student needs. Every year we get a new group of students, sometimes more often than that. They are different. We can't do the same thing every year. Sometimes we can't do the same thing every week. And we need to look at how to support some students or how to support students in some areas and how to accelerate some students and how to challenge students, some students or some students in some areas. That's a major one. And again, you're going to hear some things there from our panelists.
Dave, one question on this.
Yep.
In this particular slide, is acceleration and enrichment the same, or is acceleration just moving ahead faster?
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably enrichment would have been a better word for me to put here.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I don't like to use the word covering curriculum, but it kind of applies here because the point I want to make is, we're always trying to add things to the curriculum. Everybody has good intentions, but, social emotional learning is a good example. Everybody knows I feel it's very important. But when it comes in as we're adding something to what's already happening in the curriculum, and you can't always add. Sometimes you have to either package it differently or take stuff out. And I talked a little bit about that when I talked about curriculum last month. But the other thing is that knowledge is increasing exponentially, and we also have technology that can help us out with a lot of that knowledge. So a lot of that we need to look at as we go along. And that changes greatly. This year is a perfect example of that. Think about where we were, 10 months ago and where we are now. We just went to fully remote in all 7 schools for the first time since we closed school last year. And we're in a much different place, and a much better place because things change so much. Engaging students, you saw that in Danielson. And obviously that's important for students to be engaged. Keeping high expectations, student assumption of responsibility. And what that means is that students start to become their own learners. They take responsibility for their own learning, and they're not just passive learners. And that's an important part of instruction as well. And then, of course, equity and cultural competence and sensitivity. Which is something that I know that the board is looking at on another track, a parallel track, but obviously very important as well. And next slide. So we have actually 3 sets of teachers who are going to present briefly for you today, some of the things that they're doing that highlight some of that stuff that I just talked about. And from Weber Middle School, we have two teams, and we're going to start off with Ms. Hutchinson and Mr. Bass. We're going to talk about English language arts and social studies integration. Next slide.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thanks for having us. Social studies content is a great vehicle for working on literacy skills, and Ms. Hutchinson and I have been doing that over our time together. There's a lot of rich materials, literary, great, wonderful documents throughout the curriculum, and a lot of them are difficult for students to read. I mean, we're talking about 18th and 19th century documents, and I don't want to brush through them without kind of digging down deep and offering exposure to these documents. And working with Ms. Hutch allows the opportunity to really delve a little bit deeper and to use these documents in ways that I might not be able to really effectively use just if I was working individually in my classroom. So there's a bunch of different strategies we try to employ when we are working through some of the more difficult yet rich documents. And as I said, exposure I think is important, especially in light of civics education and how important it is to just have exposure and awareness of some of the materials that are part of the 7th grade curriculum, which is what I teach. So Ms. Hutch might want to talk a little bit about how we extend the use of these documents with literacy skills.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. We have an opportunity now to do a closer reading, to teach the kids how to do a close reading of not only documents, but a literary text in conjunction with the social studies curriculum. We're able to do read alouds and think alouds, to teach kids how to annotate, to try to make sense of information using the margins on their papers, etc. We can share vocabulary, common vocabulary in both rooms so that the kids see the connections, helping them build connections between the two subject matters. We think it's working very well for us. Again, we've been doing this for a long time together, so we're constantly changing and refining, but the skills in both courses overlap and work very well together.
And we also are able to use the social studies content and curriculum to develop writing assignments throughout the year. We're able to really have the content as the basis for which we think are critical thinking and real rich writing assignments that aren't just summarizing material, but really delving deeper into and using critical thinking, not just to analyze reading, analyze documents, but also to create their own pieces of writing. So we're able to do that really throughout the time that we've had together. And speaking of time together, collaboration is another major aspect of integration. As far as teachers working with teachers, there's a great opportunity to create assignments together, develop assignments, really have the opportunity also to deliver instruction while we can reflect on how the classes are unfolding, how the lessons are unfolding. So just having the ability to, after class ends, to spend 5 minutes reflecting on what we just were doing for the last part of our time together, it's real-time value. It allows us to tinker with and to refine and improve instruction almost in real time. So just having two professionals who are able to reflect during the class, able to redirect if need be, just adds two sets of eyes in a classroom, just adds that much more. So please.
Well, and I think also under the collaboration, it also allows us to give students more of an opportunity to collaborate. We're able to open up the groupings, whether we're in person in school or even now remotely. We're able to combine our classes and allow for kids to have a greater opportunity to work with students who aren't necessarily in that specific classroom. And it's their collaboration, it's their ability to work together that we really strive for, because kids working together become adults who can work together. So the collaboration, combining the English and social studies, we found to be an effective tool.
Yeah, you open up the pool of children that they get to work with, as opposed to just, let's say, a class of 22. Now you got 44, so they get to interact with students that they might necessarily not have the chance to work with otherwise. So it just adds to the pool of collaboration, and it develops those very important interpersonal skills that are going to be necessary moving forward. And also just it allows us as teachers to kind of gauge what's going on in the classroom in real time. And we've been able to really work together to kind of pinpoint overall deficiencies that we notice with the students, and then just having, two teachers reflecting on what we've noticed allows us to really improve instruction and make it that much more efficient. So speaking of efficiency, it also allows us. Did I miss anything, Ms. Hutch?
No, you're doing great.
And by the way, there's a lot, there's a lot more to add with the first two bullets. I mean, obviously, and anybody who knows Ms. Hutch and I knows we can keep on talking. We don't like to over talk. But the last thing, managing, pardon me, and maximizing time. Time is a precious commodity, as we all know, and just being able to make better use of the time is something that comes along naturally with integration. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, a 40-minute class can double in the block of time, which allows a lot more to happen. I mean, just practically 40 minutes versus 80 minutes, you could understand the ability to not rush through stuff, to really slow down, to allow things to develop, allow questions and answers, allow a break time in between. If it's just social studies class and then English class separate, it really doesn't allow for that. So just from a practical standpoint, it adds a bigger block of time. And with that comes lots and lots of flexibility to maximize and manage that time.
And I'll just say again, it allows us for flexible groupings within the classroom, but it also, I think, allows the students to manage and maximize time to a different extent. If we're creating, for example, a written assignment together, the kids then are working on the skills that we're promoting, but instead of working on a writing assignment in social studies and a separate writing assignment in English, the kids are focusing their energy on one assignment with two adults guiding that process. So it's their time, and I think it allows them just a vision of how school should work. When they see the adults able to work together for a common goal, then perhaps they're able to transfer that to themselves, able to work for, that goal. So there's so much more we could say under all of this after, 15, 18 years of working together, but that's kind of an overview of how we're handling the instruction in our integrated classroom right now.
And believe it or not, I'm not going to add anything. I'm just going to say, at the end, if there are any questions, I do have a class at 10:45, which I'll be stepping away for, but I'll be here, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, same.
Thank you.
Dr. Mioli, if we're going to lose some of our educators, do you want to allow questions after each presentation? What do you think is better?
I'd like to get through, because I think we should be done in maybe, 20 more minutes.
Okay, good. So there'll be plenty of time anyway.
Yeah. As you can see, I'm keeping on pretty tight leash here. So. All right.
Thank you.
I did do the first part.
So next slide, and that gives me the opportunity to introduce our second team, Dr. Hollis and Ms. Bocchino.
Thanks for having us here. Really appreciate it. And it was interesting for me listening to Mr. Bass and Ms. Hutchinson talk about what they do, and there was just so much connection for me in terms of what we've done over the past years. And yet I noticed also just some of the different emphases they have, and I really enjoyed that. We're going to focus on a few different things, but I think you're going to hear a lot of overlap in terms of what we're saying, in terms of what you just heard. And so what I'm going to do is try to sort of articulate 4 specific concepts or principles that we found to be very essential in what we do, and also sort of use our year-long research project that Ms. Bocchino and I developed over the course of about 9 years to sort of amplify each one of those principles. So I'm going to be referring to, and we'll be referring to that, but this is not a presentation on that particular project. I think to do that adequately would take, I'm going to estimate around 2.5 or 3 hours. So our first principle is choice. And we found that over the years, the number one predictor really of whether or not students did well and really engaged with our year-long research project was really directly correlated to the extent to which they really liked what they were doing, right? So that the idea that they had this sense of empowerment, first of all, that they could choose, and that we were going to then be responsive to what they chose, and design something specifically for them. It had the effect both of interesting them and I think validating them in terms of what they were doing in particular. So we found that actually to be, I think, the #1 predictor of student success in the research project. Closely joined with that as a predictor of success was, I'll use the fancy term, differentiation, right? Which is the idea of meeting the kids where they were. So in our groupings, typically here in Port Washington, we have a vast range of skill and ability in our student population, which means if you're going to do something, you really have to design it in such a way that you're hitting every kid where he or she is. Which means for our kids that are way up here, we want to get something in their hands and design something for them for that year-long research project that lets them soar and go even higher. And for the kids that are in the middle, we want to get them much higher than where they are. And for the kids who are sort of struggling, we have to meet them where they are and bring them up.
I'm just going to interrupt for
go right ahead.
Dr. House. This also speaks to vertical integration, articulation.
Mm-hmm.
So we really had to be able to speak to the 7th grade teachers, especially at the beginning of the year, to know really what levels each child was at. So that would give us a good indication of their reading level, of what they were capable of. Mm-hmm. And then we were always sort of looking to get them to that higher level. So we're meeting them where they are, and then we're looking to get them to that higher level. But that vertical articulation, extremely important.
Sure. And so between the choosing, right, the self-selection component and really the trying to get the right level material in the right kid's hands, and we usually defined that our goal, our ultimate goal in terms of that level was to pick something that was challenging but not frustrating. So we wanted to sort of hit slightly above where they were at the moment. So those two things combined, we found that over the years, with our year-long research project, if you could get those two things right, then you had a great chance of really ensuring individual student success and really growth and development. The third sort of component, and there's many, but the third one we're emphasizing today is this idea of skills-based integration. Very often over the years when I've heard people talk about integration, and by the way, I think you heard this from Mr. Bass and Ms. Hutchinson just now as well. We focus more on skills-based integration, which frankly is a higher level of integration. Very often when you hear people talk about integration, they tend to think of sort of, content running parallel to each other. But frankly, the more natural marriage of English and social studies is through skill development. And so our philosophy in that regard was always kind of to make the social studies teacher into more of the second English teacher. And then that gave us, from, first of all, a time management perspective, and also from just the natural marriage of those skill goals, right, a more natural way into blending the two things together in a way that didn't make the English teacher subservient really to the social studies timeline, if you will.
Very quickly, some of the skills we're talking about here, note-taking skills, paraphrasing skills, knowing how to cite outlines, being able to connect your ideas in a way that makes sense and flow well. So very quickly, those are some of the skills we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. And the nice thing too is, and I believe that Mr. Bass and Ms. Hutchinson alluded to this too, is when you have multiple people, you have two people who are continually emphasizing the same things with the kids, they really start to believe in the value of those things, right? So if you're hearing the same thing twice, right, and you see that these two grown-ups in your life value these things, it creates a sense of that these things are in fact very important. And it's one of the beautiful things I think about integration at Weber is, and in general, but it's not a situation really 1 + 1 = 2. It's really, there's an amplification effect of when you have two people working in concert and then creating that atmosphere and that climate for kids, that they are all sort of working together collaboratively, not only teacher to teacher, but also kid to kid, then you have really an amplification of that. So it's an exponential effect of putting the two people together if it's done right, frankly. And that leads me to sort of the last, I think, major component that we wanted to really emphasize today, which is the idea of creating that climate, that atmosphere, that environment where kids are excited about the fact that they are individually exploring and have some agency over their own learning. And the neat thing for us that used to happen with our research projects, year-long research project, is by about May, they would know so much about their own individual thing that they had sort of taken on the status of mini expert on that thing, and they would start to talk to each other. So we would have classroom settings where hands would be going up and kids would be giving input on the thing that they knew best because they were so confident, and then someone else would chime back in with something that they knew. And it was really neat that way. And then the ancillary effect of that is you now have created this sort of community of learners in a very real sense, not just sort of pie in the sky, words, but you really have created this community of learners. And then that atmosphere becomes, it helps with this, I call it the social emotional learning, which I don't really like to use that phrase. It helps with the feeling that they get when they come to school. It helps them really believe that the place that they're in is a place where they can share and be safe. And then that also would always help us address other issues that would come up, in their life, with friends, with whatever was going on in their life, because in general, the environment they found themselves in was one where they felt valued and listened to, and that they felt that they could give input into. So we always found that that was another neat effect of integration itself, was helping us to create that environment that we wanted. Ms. Bocchino?
I just wanted to actually touch back on a couple of things that you said in your presentation, Dr. Mioli. The idea of active learning. So, passes versus active. Do you have students just kind of passively sitting there and you're spoon feeding information? Well, if you do the type of teaching that Dr. Hollis was just talking about, that there's really no way that can happen, right? So you have a very sort of active learning environment going on based on the way that we are delivering the instruction, right? The other thing that I think is very, very important to point out, year after year, you have sort of a different flavor of students that come to you, right? So every year, Dr. Hollis and I never did the same thing year after year. And I'm sure it's the same for Ms. Hutch and Mr. Bass. It really depends on the group of students you have in front of you, what's going on in their lives, their skill levels, and all of that. So every year you're looking at what you're doing and you're tweaking. That's just good teaching in general. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well. Also, depending on the teams, each team has a different culture, right? Different skill levels. There are different situations going on. So each team might do things a little bit differently as well. It's pretty much what I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, and I think that difference is actually very essential, because it enables the teachers, the grown-ups in the equation, to do things that they find exciting, and to do things that they're comfortable with, and to do things that play into their strengths. And that ultimately is best for kids, because you're doing things better than you otherwise would do them, which is why I think you hear a lot of the same things in what Ms. Bocchino and I say, and what Mr. Bass and Ms. Hutchinson said, and yet you're hearing also the different flavors that each of those team settings really has. And I think that's essential and important as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it goes along with the ingredients you were talking about before. Anyway, I'll turn my mic off.
No, that's okay. Sorry. So I just want to go back to that word art again, the art of instruction. And I'll ask Ms. Javelin to just wrap us up for the middle school piece, and then we have Mr. Ryan as well. Next slide.
Hi, everybody. So just to sum up quickly, interdisciplinary teaching is combining more than one subject, and it requires co-planning and collaboration amongst both the teachers and the students, and it enriches the experience of all the children. Some benefits, which you've heard, I'm just going to try to sum it up a little bit, is subjects are not to be seen in a box, right? We incorporate what we're learning from other classrooms, and we're putting it together, and then learning becomes alive. It increases student engagement and motivation and achievement. It emphasizes that, integrated, each subject does play on each other, and we learn skills from each other's classes, and then we could put them together. It fosters critical thinking. Students look across different subjects and consider other viewpoints, so they're not just seeing it from one lens. They're able to take what they learned in other subjects and incorporate it together. They could have creative problem solving. It connects curriculum, I said, embraces new ideas, develops collaboration skills, which I believe we spoke about. You gain different perspectives, so you're not just seeing it from an English teacher's perspective, but you're seeing it from an English teacher and a social studies perspective, and you're hearing different viewpoints. You're getting insight and skills from different subjects, and you have the opportunity to apply your knowledge and deepen your skills and what you've learned into use your experience based in other classes. And how do we provide that at the middle school? And our schedule is a really important component and how we build our teams and house structure. So I know Ms. Bocchino spoke about the vertical articulation. The reason we're able to have vertical articulation is because of our house structure. So students that are in one house, we have a direct connection to those teachers, and then there's conversations that happen. Together as a team, we create culture, and we create a feeling and embrace that feeling amongst each team. So the team structure and house structure is critical for both vertical and horizontal articulation. We also provide a block schedule, meaning that English and social studies are back to back in the schedule. So when necessary, it provides us flexibility. So teachers can either teach for the double period, or they can teach individually. So whether they're teaching double or individually, we're still integrating, but it's not necessarily with up to 56 students. Sometimes we're dealing with 25, sometimes we're dealing with 56. And the teachers have the flexibility to decide when that is necessary to further their instruction. And teachers also are provided planning time at the middle school. They work together, they have time to sit and talk about the curriculum, talk about what they're teaching, talk about the students they're teaching, and able to make connections that are relevant and important in the classroom. So that's a brief, quick overview of what goes on at Weber. I hope I hit every point.
I think you checked the boxes. Thank you. And so all by way of saying that Weber is built to encourage this kind of integration and collaboration. And I think you can see how that helps in a lot of ways, especially with that age level. Thank you all. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a perspective from the elementary level as well. As the board knows well, and the community, we were fortunate to be able to go to a one-to-one device for every student and every staff member this year, kind of making lemonade out of lemons. I want to make sure that people have a lens on what this looks like, not only during the pandemic when we are remote and hybrid, but looking forward, what it has looked like and what I think it will be looking like in more and more classrooms as we move out of the emergency situation. And outnumbered, but I think not outgunned, I'll introduce Mr. Justin Ryan to go through that.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Larry, please say hi to Kevin for me.
Next slide.
So, next slide, yep. We can go to the next slide. All right, so just to give myself a little validation, a little bit about me. 5 years ago, I put in a grant with the Ed Foundation to have my own set of Chromebooks in my classroom that was dedicated solely to my classroom. And I was awarded that grant. The big difference between now and then was they weren't allowed to take the Chromebooks home, so it was kind of a half one-to-one integration, but the benefits were there nonetheless. I did this because as I was taking more classes, I became a Google certified trainer by being a certification through Stony Brook University. And I was able to not only use it in the classroom, all the Google Apps for Education, but I was able also to teach other teachers and get them certified as well. And the big thing with this was it would teach the 21st century skills to students, at a much younger age. And I think the middle school teachers would probably appreciate that coming through because they're a lot more prepared when they do get there. We go to the next slide. All right, so the benefits that I'm going to go through, the first one is accessibility, then flexibility, collaboration, which you've heard 100 times already, differentiation, equitability, and real world ready, which are all things that I feel are very important with this one-to-one device. Next slide. So in terms of accessibility, before I had my one-to-one situation, getting into one computer lab when there are 25 classes in a school is extremely difficult. So you would have your one session a week, and then there'd be some open times that everybody would fight over, to try to get in there and get their work done. And it was never easy. So this led to, number one, not enough time. And number two, the students not getting nearly enough practice with the technology that you wanted them to be able to use. So we wouldn't have the time to become comfortable with it because it was so sporadic in the amount of time they got to use with it. And also in the elementary schools, we have a lot of things where students are pulled out, whether it be OT, speech, reading, anything that they have to get pulled out for. If that was during your computer lab time, those students miss that every single time, except for the 1 or 2 times you get to sign up during a different slot. So having the one-to-one initiative in the classroom helps everybody have the same level playing field and get things done that they have to get done. So they have access to the technology that we didn't have before, which is a huge, huge thing for our students. Next slide. Flexibility. So this is one of my favorite things. Again, with kids being pulled out, we had what our protected time, but that's not enough time to teach in a day. It's really not. So some students would have to miss something that might have been important, and you never want your students to miss that. But now if you have the one-to-one device and they can access Google Classroom and everything that you have on your Google Classroom, you might be able to set up a different schedule for a different student in your class. So while you have your general schedule for the day, if you know a student is being pulled, you can have them work on something in your Google Classroom while you're teaching something else because you don't want them to miss it. And then obviously you'll have time to go and connect with them and make sure that they're understanding what's going on, as opposed to them just missing that lesson because they had to go to another classroom. And then again, this also provides them an ability to go back and look at things. The flexibility of seeing it in another time because it's already there. It didn't just happen on the board, get wiped away. It's there for them to have and have access to all the time. Next slide. Collaboration, which again, you've heard over and over and over again. This is my favorite thing. So thankfully we have the one-to-ones because I've been able to save this a little bit during this pandemic. As Dr. M, he's been watching me for years now. In my classroom, my students work together all the time. And when you have to take 6 feet of distance, it's kind of taken that away from me. But the one-to-one device has allowed me to use breakout rooms and has allowed me to keep them connected with each other without being close to each other, which is huge. So when we're using Google, the students can work from anywhere. Okay, so even when they're at home, if they are working on a shared document, they can work with each other. They can make comments with each other. They're always collaborating. It could be 24/7. And it's also good for the teachers because they can provide feedback in real time. I can have a student working at home and I can comments, especially last year when we did go remote, they found it amazing when I would hop on it as they're working on a Google slide. And I'd be like, hey, Eddie. And Eddie would be like, how's Mr. Ryan here? But I was able to hop in and really make them feel like we were still connected all the time. And this has benefits across the board because, like I said, as I'm watching the Islander game at night, I can still make comments to my students and we can have that connection and they can get feedback in real time. So the feedback is huge, and the collaboration between not just, like I said, the students together, but also the teacher and the students. Next slide. Differentiation. Now we can talk about this all day. Having the one-to-one device accesses a million new things for your students. You have students coming, I'm in 3rd grade, which is a whole different world than the middle schoolers. I have students that come into 3rd grade that still have a very hard time reading. And when we get into a lot of our text and everything, they struggle, and they struggle mightily. and it hurts their self-esteem. It hurts their desire to learning, which Dr. Milley talked about in the beginning, and they feel defeated. But now there are so many different tools out there where the book can be read to them, and they understand it when it's read to them, but now they have access to that, okay, on their own time. You have Google Translate. So if you have somebody who comes in who doesn't speak a lot of English, you can really connect with them, even though you may not speak their language. Okay, there's so many different things here. And like I said, the engagement piece too is love technology. I mean, it really just, if you have the Chromebook in front of them and they're doing something on the Chromebook, that's motivation all in itself. And they're good at it. So we might as well take advantage of their skills. What else do I have on here? Again, different delivery method. It allows for choice as well, which is a huge piece of differentiation. A student can choose whether they want to make a Google Doc, whether they want to make a poster on a slide, or they can do old fashioned and they can draw a poster. Again, it allows them that choice where they can really choose what they want. And if they're doing what they want, they're going to give a lot more effort, like we heard before. Okay. And again, it provides guided learning according to individual student abilities. So you can have multiple worksheets pushed out for the same assignment on varying levels, and all you have to do is adjust the document. Nobody knows anybody's getting anything different, because in the classroom, you can just assign it to different kids and they have it right in front of them on their screen. So nobody knows that somebody's doing something that might be a little bit easier or a little bit, adjusted to their level, while somebody's doing the regular work that's in the classroom. Next slide. Equity. So another piece about me is I am, as Kevin would call me, a Port Washingtonian. I'm third generation Port Washington. I've kind of never left besides college. So I grew up in Port Washington. I grew up in Manor Haven. I went to Manor Haven Elementary School, Weber, Schreiber, and now I'm teaching at Sousa. So I know Port Washington like the back of my hand. And the best thing about Port Washington is that we have such a wide variety in our community of people. It's a reason a lot of people come to Port Washington. My neighbor told me that's the reason he moved here. But with that wide variety, we have huge differences in socioeconomic situations. So we have students that may not have access to all of these technologies, which hurts them because they can't keep up with everybody else. And in the ever-growing technological world, they're lacking these skills, and it's not their fault. They just don't have it. But now with the one-to-one, initiative, they have that technology. They can keep pace with everybody else around them, and it's huge for them. And I've seen it in the classroom where somebody might not have been confident before, but now they have those skills and they're ready to go. So it keeps that equal playing field regardless of where you come from, which is huge. And the students get so much more comfortable with it. So if somebody didn't have a computer at home and then they come in and, like I said, I'm in elementary school. It could be as little as turning it on or logging in, which everybody takes for granted. But when you haven't had access to that, it's embarrassing. You get nervous. You don't want to do things. But now that everybody has the devices, they are on the same playing field. That's something that we don't have to worry about so much. So, I mean, that right there in itself is worth every little piece of it. Next slide. And then this is, again, one of my other favorite pieces, and where I got my Google training is at the elementary level, especially, they're getting real world ready from a much earlier age now. When they get to my friends in the middle school, they're going to be well versed on Google Docs, Google Slides. My kids are using drawings. They are sharing documents. They're collaborating with each other over the internet. They are doing all these things that never thought was possible, which is going to help them a lot more, because when they are going to introduce this and they're going to use it in their classroom, they're ready to go. They don't have to sit there. They don't have to waste time explaining all of these things, because they will have experienced it now for years before them. So now it's helping them get middle school ready, high school ready, college ready, and then obviously for the real world ready from a much younger age. And the 21st century skills that I've always focused on are communication. So in my classroom, they're communicating with one another, whether it be on a shared document or in the classroom. Collaboration, we already talked about, is huge over this. And critical thinking is very important here, because they have to decide how they want to do their work, how they want to show their work. they have to think about, well, if I do it this way, this can be done. Or if I do it with a Google Doc, I can actually add this to it. Now they're really going in their heads and seeing which route they want to take and which one will work best for them. This also provides that ownership that's not even in my slideshow, but which is very important. They're becoming responsible for their own education and how they want to do it, which again keeps them going and gives them that self-efficacy and that desire to keep learning. And then creativity is endless because there are so many options. You know, we use Book Creator. Again, we use the Google Docs. We use Flipgrid. These are all possible because everybody has their own device and they're getting so much more comfortable with it. So the creativity is also there as well. And then I just want to show you on the next slide, just a piece from the classroom of something that uses all of this in one small lesson that I've done. So this is a social studies lesson where we're introducing the continents. In third grade, we kind of go around the world, but in the beginning, we go over the continents and oceans. So this is like a little mini research lesson that I give to my students. So the students are assigned a continent, and we have 7 different groups. I differentiate, again, as the teacher in the classroom, I know my students. So I'll differentiate by mixing the levels of my students that I know so that other students can learn from each other and they can work together, help each other get to where they need to be. Secondly, we'll assign a hyperdoc, and a hyperdoc is basically a Google Doc that has links within it so that they have a pathway to get to all of their information. Okay, so I'll have in that Google Doc, that hyperdoc, I will have links to videos, which are helpful. Again, this helps with differentiation, with ebooks that either can be read or they can be read to the student. Okay, and kid-friendly websites where they can do a little bit of research on their own, like Hucksters and and things like that, that will give them access to information that they will need. So that will give them the differentiation, and then the critical thinking is that the individual work will hold each student accountable. So the way I do this is they're all assigned their continent and a template. They go out and do their research. They answer questions, and again, I can differentiate by really guiding a student in one template, but I can leave it more open-ended for somebody who I want to enrich. So that's a big way of doing the differentiation there. And then they're gathering all this information on their device on their own. But now it comes in the collaboration. So after they've had time to gather their information and we hold them accountable for bringing work to the group, they're now into their continent groups. And then within their continent groups, they're going to have collaboration and creativity and critical thinking, because they're going to have a choice of how they're going to present their information, but they have to put it together with each other. They have to critically think and communicate with each other how they're going to present it, because they could do a Flipgrid where they do like a little presentation on their continent by giving the information. They could do a Google drawing poster where they create a poster with text boxes, pictures, like a mini brochure, okay? Or they could choose a Google Doc and do a written report, which is more, old school, but gets the information out there. So in there is critical thinking, there's creativity, there's collaboration, there's all the 21st century skills, all because they have a one-to-one device and they can do this all. And it could be done whether it's at home, whether it's in school, or anything like that. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. So let me just wrap up quickly, and I know you want to get to questions. Next slide. This kind of sums it up. The greatest effects on student learning occur when teachers become learners of their own teaching and students become their own teachers. And that's that handoff, that teaching and learning, and the art that I think you have heard over and over again today of the instructors seeing who the students cohort that they have in front of them and adjusting the instruction accordingly. Next slide. The next 2 slides are the same slides I had on curriculum. And I just want to make sure that I reiterate that we have lots of good instructional components now. I think this, us getting together to prepare this presentation, I certainly learned a lot, and I think we all did. And these kinds of discussions I think are great because education still tends to be an isolated profession. And that's one of the great things about integration and one of the great things about this technology. And then the last slide. Again, I just want to tie it back in. The reason that I wanted to do curriculum instruction assessment and have that talk is to make sure that we understand how important it is that we have all these good things going on, but I think it will rise to an even higher level. I know it will, when we look at what we want our graduate profile to be, and we have a mission and vision that we all can talk about. That process is going to be as important as the product, and I think it will help us align all of these things that we're doing well even better. And so thank you, and we are open to questions. And thank you, presenters. I really appreciate your time and your effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Can we have the video engineer take the slide down just so, thank you. So on the live stream, everybody can see faces again. Does anybody on the committee have a question? Larry, go ahead.
You knew I was going to have a question. Anyway,
I was looking right at you.
I do appreciate everybody's reports. I think they were all great. I think it represents the best of what we do. The question is this being done universally? And certainly we've had some indication that at least at Weber, there are some large subgroups that are not doing well at all. And I guess my question is, how does failing somebody help their self-esteem? And how does it make them believe that they can be successful if at age 12 and 13, you're telling them that they're not?
Well, I think I'm going to chime in, and I'm not going to stop anybody else from answering, but we are going to talk about assessment next month. So I think one of the things we need to talk about is giving Ds and Fs. But that's kind of another whole piece of this. I think in terms of the universality of it, again, most of you know me pretty well. I'm in the schools every day, and there's a lot of good instruction going on. One of we've discussed this, and I won't go into it in great detail, but the socioeconomic factor is not. Port Washington is not alone in our the way that certain subgroups perform, and we have looked at making that better on a number of occasions, and made some adjustments, and we need to do more. And I think, again, having these kinds of discussions with that lens and that double track that I talked about earlier, that the board has set, access and equity and mission and vision, I think the two go hand in hand and will inform each other.
Okay, thanks.
Deborah, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a community comment that actually echoes the question that I was going to ask Rachel. I'll let you read that into the record. So my question was going to be, it's obvious that we've pulled some of the best teachers with the best practices. How do we ensure, and I know that from personal experience with two of the teachers here, but how do we ensure that best practices are being spread across the district? We had this discussion when we went fully remote in March. How are we going to make whatever came out of that experience, those best practices, how are we going to make sure that that was spread throughout the district? But in general, when we hopefully return to a non-pandemic situation, how do we ensure that the enthusiasm, the motivation, the best practices, the inspiration, the innovation is as equal, as equitable as it can be throughout the district? We have this conversation about playgrounds, right? At our different elementary schools. How do we make sure the instruction is even as even can be, I suppose?
I'll take it. I don't want to just monopolize everything here. Dave?
Well, I'm not sure if what I'm going to say addresses exactly where you were heading with that or not. A few years ago, Dina and I were asked to speak about our particular research project in front of some parent group, and it went really well, and I enjoyed it very much. And at the end of it, though, what struck me was apparently some people in the audience their impulse was, well, maybe other people could do what you guys are doing, which was very flattering. But my reaction to that, and I think I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about the different flavors of the teams, is that whatever it is that a team is doing really has to come from them and play into the strengths and comfort level of those particular people who are doing it. And if it comes out that way and it's of their own creation, that is going to give it the greatest chance of success. If anyone were to, I think, try to take, let's say, what Mike and Liz do and say, okay, now you do that, or alternatively what Dina and I did and say, now you do that, I think the results would not be what you wanted, because it doesn't come from a place of their own creation. So, you know, I've been in the building now in Weber now for 27 years, and I've seen a lot of different iterations of this kind of integration, but it's always done with the individual flair and flavor of the people that are uniquely paired together. So I'm on my fourth partner now. I've been blessed with 4 amazing partners. And what I'm now trying to develop with my new partner is very different than what I did with, you know, Miss Bocchino, which is in turn different than what I did with Miss Fish, and certainly very different than what I did with the great one, Steve Shackle, you know, because they're just very different personalities and they're very different people, and I'm at a different stage in my life. And so all of those things factor together how you go about doing this thing, which is why we were trying to, I think, emphasize principles that we believe in, really. But I do think, as a caveat, it is potentially, you know, unwise to try to ever, you know, sort of graft onto anyone else something somebody else is doing, because I just don't think it will come out that way. I hope that addressed your question. I don't know if it did. I apologize.
It does, and I find your answer really fascinating, and it's given me a lot of thought, because it really speaks to the individuality of the teachers and the abilities and the gifts that the teachers bring. And what I hear you saying is, don't cookie cutter the teacher. The richness in the district is because of the diversity of the teachers and their abilities. I have to think about how that, I agree with you on that. I think that's very profound. So I just have to figure out a way to make sure that the students are, you know, some of them will say, you know, this house is better or that house is better. And I guess to make sure that, I guess within the instruction that there's parity, I suppose, maybe not equity, but I take to heart what you say. It's very profound and I appreciate it.
It's interesting. It seems to me, because both Larry and Deborah have both asked the question that's always my first question too. It seems to me that there's a balance, because we're lucky. We currently have a very pro-education board. I don't think there's anybody on this board that would ask a question that means that they think that we should just dictate to teachers exactly what they do. I think we all agree that, you know, letting teachers have their independence and decision making is part of what makes magic happen in the classroom. But on the other hand, we do have children collaborate with students who are different or approaching things differently with the idea that they're learning from it. So I guess my piggybacking question on Deborah would be, not dictating from the top what teachers should do, but is there communication between the teams that are teaching the same thing, but to different groups of children? I guess at Weber it would be different houses. At the elementary school it might be different schools, so that you're seeing what others are doing and maybe adopting things or thinking about things you could be doing differently, because humans just do learn from each other, and it helps brainstorming when you are seeing other ideas. And that's something we tell the kids. It seems like it's the case with adults too. Do you feel that kind of thing happening in our district? Are there other things that could be put in place to make it happen better, or are we already there? I guess you get what I'm getting at here.
So, I mean, I can certainly address that from the middle school perspective. So in addition to team time, we also have department time scheduled throughout the week, as well as our natural Wednesdays where teams and teachers meet together. We talk all the time. I talk with the teachers talk to teachers. We have text messages, whether it's social studies teachers or, and ideas are brought all the time, but teachers really have, like I think Dr. Hollis said it, teachers have to be comfortable with what they're teaching. So if I come down and say, you have to teach this, it's coming from me and it won't be authentic and it won't be delivered the right way. So we are in communication all the time about things that we are doing, things that I'm hearing from principals in other middle schools. I bring to the table and share ideas, and we talk about it. We talk about what will work, what won't work, what might work in Dr. Hollis's room, but not in Mr. Bass's room. And we base it based on the children in front of us and based on what we each individually believe to get across. We do follow standards, but how we get to that standards and how we get to the end game is up to the teacher. But we all follow standards, and there is a curriculum that we follow, but how we deliver it and how we teach it it could be different.
Yeah, I have to step off and step out to a class, but there's also like opportunities for informal conversations that happen all throughout the school year. I know I speak to the 7th grade teachers and ask, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? What worked? What didn't work? So there's the opportunity to just have informal collaboration and then really formal kind of discussions as well, to not necessarily stay on the same page, but understand that we're all striving to move forward in ways that make things more exciting, more interactive, more integrated, and just more effective. So that's always happening. And I'm sorry I have to step out, but thanks for having all the teachers that were invited, and I appreciate everything.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for coming.
Mr. Ryan, I think you were raising your hand next.
Yeah, just to go back to the original question, I know like on my 3rd grade level, everything I do is shared with my colleagues. That's another beautiful part about Google is with the click of a button, they have access to everything you have either created or have access to, which then what Dr. Hollis was saying, that doesn't mean they're going to use it verbatim. That means they have access to it and they can now make it so it works best for them. They'll have editing rights in order to make it work best for them, because how I deliver, and you can ask Dr. M this, how I deliver my instruction is going to be totally different than how a lot of other teachers do it. I'm pretty laid back. I'm pretty, I really try to work on that relationship with my students so that they, want to be with me and they want to work for me. But like I said, so everybody, that collaboration is happening. The biggest, hindrance to that is time in the elementary level. If we don't have common preps, which we don't have at this particular moment, we don't have the time to actually talk with each other on all of those things, because we are with our students all day long. There aren't any breaks in the day unless it's your lunchtime, that you can really get together with your other students in the one Wednesday a month. So that's the biggest hindrance if you want to talk about the collaboration. And even if you're talking about over elementary school, is the time to get together and do all this, because most of it's happening on our text messages, at 9 o'clock at night as we're, trying to get things done. So again, that would be the biggest hindrance I would see for the elementary level in order to get that collaboration. But thankfully, Google has made it a lot better, especially on my team level, where literally with the click, they can have it and they can now edit it and make it their own, as opposed to, like you said, the cookie cutter of just doing what I do. Because like I said, my delivery is going to be different from another 3rd grade teacher's delivery, just naturally.
So I'll just add 2 things. One, what's my favorite department?
The not for nothing.
The not for nothing
See,
department.
I was
muted.
I
In
feel
the
like
not-
I'm in Jeopardy. I couldn't get unmuted fast.
Just like Hollywood Squares. In the not for nothing department, we'll be talking about Weber Wednesdays again, and I hope that you see how important, part of the reason that we have those is so that all of this can happen. It's really the Weber is built for this, and it is for a reason. And the other thing I want to just say is, I came to you as a brand new assistant superintendent, you meaning the board, and asked for, extra half days of professional development, and you didn't hesitate. And even though, that's a hard thing to do. And that's the other thing here is, the teachers need time to get together, outside of their teams, outside of their buildings, and work with, technology and other people in other buildings and grade levels. And that, I think, is one of the things that I hope will happen more as we move forward with the mission and vision work and our strategic plan. So thank you for those PD days.
Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
I want to thank everybody, the teachers that are here today, and thank Dr. Mioli. And I think, it's very inspiring hearing what you are doing and looking at the rubrics, which, I'm not that familiar with, and I'm actually looking forward to taking more time to read them when they're posted. And I do understand, Dave, what you're saying about assessment is a different issue when we talk about D's and F's and, the relative merit or not of doing that. But getting back to the curriculum piece, I do think that my concern, and I know we're not alone in this in terms of being the only district by any means, but my concern is that the curriculum, the instruction, which is what we're talking about, is not getting to the quote subgroups, and whether or not they're getting D's or F's, even if we decide, or not me, but whether it's decided, okay, we're not going to give somebody a D or an F because it's really demoralizing. The question really is that instruction, how are we going to get that instruction to those students? I mean, I know there's been a long-standing problem of inequity, and I'm not pointing any fingers whatsoever. I've been on the board for 9 years myself, okay? But there is a long-standing problem. And are there plans being made for this type of wonderful instruction to be better honed or better fitted so that there's more, so that the opportunity gap starts getting closed? And I know we're going to be doing more equity work, but I feel like I just need to acknowledge that, because what we're seeing here really sounds great. And I'm impressed, with the presentations, and it's like, wow, doing great things at Weber. But I do know, or we do know, that there are groups, if you want to say that, of students that this is not working for. I'm sorry,
can I jump in for 1 sec? I think this is an issue that's not just a Weber issue, and it's a district issue that we need to address. And I don't want to make it that Weber's failing students, because it's not just, this is something that is important to look at, and it's why it was brought up. And we shouldn't be failing any of our students, whether it's a subgroup or not a subgroup, and we need to figure out ways where we could help students. And we talk about that all the time at Weber, and we talk about how to help students and where to meet students at their needs. And we look at it, and I think it's something, and Dr. Mioli and I have spoken about, that we're looking at really district-wide and how we could help all these students be more successful.
I just want to jump in with a piece of information in case anybody's listening and is confused, because sometimes to follow our trains of thought, you have to be attending every single committee meeting and every single Board of Education meeting. So the topic that people are alluding to is that recently we've been talking about the fact that we have a disturbingly high rate of D's and F's among L's, English language learners, at Weber. But of course, this is I'm not meaning to contradict Mrs. Javelin. It's a very complicated issue. And of course, there are no grades given in the elementary school. So it's not fair to say that it's a problem that just occurs at Weber, but it's an equity issue that the administration and the board are looking at to see if there is something that we could be doing better for this group, and potentially, for all students as they're transitioning. Because of course, sometimes we see something more acutely in a certain group of students, but it doesn't mean that it's not an issue that touches other groups as well. It just may touch them in a different way. Nora, did you have more? Your hand is still raised. No, that looks like she's going to lower her hand. Any other questions from the committee? I'm going to go ahead and read the comments that we got by email. Our first is from Jessica Melwani, and she says, "The best practices shared by our teachers today are truly inspiring. How will the district ensure that these best instructional practices are deployed systematically across schools, elementary, and equally across classrooms? Today, the instructional experience, particularly with respect to differentiation, collaboration, and teacher relationships, is uneven. How is this being addressed? Through professional development and also through performance standards and expectations. And I'm going to risk clarifying. I think Ms. Melwani mentioned elementary school because she meant that as across schools, but I think she's probably asking about this question district-wide. Would any of you like to comment on this question?
Well, I'll start since it's my job. You know, again, I'm redundant, but I hope I'm consistently redundant. I think that the process is as important as the product. And I think that what we, you know, I keep trying to highlight, I did in curriculum, I did a little bit here in instruction, that all of these great teachers, many times are operating in isolation or semi-isolation. It's hard because they're doing their jobs all day. It's hard for them to find the time to do the kinds of things that you just heard. It takes extraordinary effort. And I think what I see my job as is to help them get more of that time and get more tools, and to do what they're trying to do for their students. I need to try to do for them. I need to try to help them do their job better. And yes, part of it is professional development. Part of it is looking at the way we do things. These are all great things, but it doesn't mean we can't do them better. And that's why I really, truly do believe that as we embark on mission and vision work, we're going to be having these discussions, and we're going to be having some difficult discussions, and we're going to be making some difficult decisions. And, you know, at the risk of going off, you know, too far off track here, I want to go back to what Ms. Brooks said, because she started talking about, you know, equity, and then she said, well, maybe I mean parity. And I think, you know, as we look at the parallel track, and I don't mean that they're separate, but that's just where we are right now. We're kind of talking about access and equity, and we're talking about instruction right now, or a 5-year plan and mission and vision. What's embedded in that title is exactly kind of what the problem is and what we have to wrestle with. And that is, when we talk about equal, if Mr. Ryan were in his classroom and he asked his third graders, what does equal mean? They would tell you it's the same for everybody. That's not what equity is. Equity is getting each what they need, you know, or as close as we can do that to succeed. And that's a difficult discussion. And in some ways, it's out of the teacher's hands. In some ways, you know, they don't get to do what they need to or want. And that's another part of what I see my job as.
So, Dr. Mioli, not to put you on the spot further, and you know that's my lead-in, to put you on the spot further.
Sorry, I have to go.
But that's why you get paid the big bucks. What does this look like, right? I think what I hear you saying is we're all in agreement. We have gifted teachers here who are doing amazing things. And what I hear you saying is the next step to spread any of this further and to have teachers take it to the next level and be able to learn even more from each other and make it that more classrooms are doing the kinds of things that are the best practices from here, is that we need to change the way we are doing things in the district. And I'm hearing some implications of additional professional development and time to collaborate. What, from your perspective, right, what do we need to do differently to give teachers the additional time they need?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do is ask them. And again, you know, I don't mean to be flippant, but I think that the communication we need, I think communication is really important, and sharing, as we're doing now. You know, I'll go back to that car slide, which is one of my favorite ones. If we didn't have the red body in there, you know, what is it? What kind of car is it? And I truly believe, and I know the superintendent does, and I hope you do because it's on our agenda for this year, that we have to kind of decide what that graduate pool looks like. What do we want it to look like when they go through 13 or more years of schooling in Port Washington? And I think that's a really good discussion to have, because we have to, you know, David gave a very, Dr. Hollis gave a very good kind of metaphor of how working together really elevates, you know, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And, you know, I have a little different metaphor that when you integrate, if you have, you know, a cup of sugar and a cup of water and you combine them together, you don't get 2 cups of stuff, because there's a solution that's made that comes together that's more efficient. You can do more, you can fit more, you know, the 5 pounds in a 4-pound box or whatever it is. I'm mixing my metaphors now. Ms. Bocchino, you can correct me later, I know. But, you know, I really think that we just need to do more of this. We need to give the teachers the opportunity to share what they're doing. And we need to have those hard discussions about what's important, where we want to end up, and then we can talk about how we're going to get there.
I have a few more community comments that I just want to read so that we get them into the record too, and then maybe you can comment on them, anybody on the panel who wants to. They're both from Kathleen Schechter. She says, good morning. When Hattie refers to teacher efficacy, he highlights collective teacher efficacy. This implies that teachers are most effective when teaching curriculum that is articulated horizontally across a grade and vertically K through 12. Teachers are most effective when they collaborate and work together with a common goal, vision, and curriculum. This means students, for example, in 6th grade ELA, would have common experiences and pedagogies regardless of the house they're in, and that K-12, there would be a common vision for what ELA students need that threads throughout the K-12 instruction. Is there a plan for designing curriculum and offering professional development to meet these goals? In my experience as a parent, curriculum and teaching methods vary widely from class to class in elementary school and house to house at Weber. I'm just going to read her second comment too, so that we can address it all at once. But her second comment says, this response is very teacher-centered. Students should always be the center of everything we need to do in a school. I'm all for teachers having some autonomy, but leaving curriculum completely to the discretion of teachers results in inequality for students.
Mind if I jump in on that one? Again, I'm all for, I think, common vision, common principles, a common understanding of what ultimately is good for kids. And I hear in the comments, and I think I understand, I hope I understand where they're coming from. And I understand it, I really do. I think there is a potential danger with a great deal of standardization in that in trying to enable every teacher or group of teachers to be able to hook into something, the impulse is to make something which is, I would call, the lowest common denominator, rather than to pursue excellence according to certain principles. So, and I know I sound, I think, like a bit of a broken record here today, but I am in favor of common vision, common principles, or articulating, let's say, what do we want kids to know and be able to do? I'm all for that. And I think those are good things to talk about. In terms of trying to, let's say, develop things that are going to then be applied in specific ways, I think the tendency then comes to sink everyone down to a certain level so that everyone has access to that, rather than to play on the strengths of individual teachers and enable them to look at the group of students in front of them and then design that way. So I think we mentioned it before, but Dina and I were, Ms. Bocchino and I were together for 9 years and did this project of sorts for 9 years. Never did it the same way twice. And that was entirely because our lens was looking at the group that's in front of us and then designing in the mega sense, and then looking at the individuals that were within the group and designing specifically for them, which is ultimately, I think, the most student-centered way you could possibly go about it, or let's say that I could pull off.
And by having teachers sort of do the same thing the same way, maybe even at the same time, if you will, you're really limiting not only the growth of the students, but the teachers as well. So everyone is sort of staying at this same level, right? Which really sort of inhibits true growth to happen. Right. So we all know, just like in every profession, right? Whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, some are just do things differently than others. Not everyone does things the same way. And yes, I also agree, and I know we talked about this, Beth, the idea of the standards. We all need to follow the standards. But the way we go about it, right, is really going to depend on what we're able to do as teachers, right? And not everyone is the same. It's just, that's life. That's just what it is.
I would also add that in our case, and again, I can only use my own experience and our experience as a point of reference, so you'll forgive me for that. But in our experience too, being able to have that fluidity and that freedom enabled us to then build off our screw ups, so each year you go, okay, what did work, what didn't work? Oh, we're not going to do that again, because we learned, okay, this topic not so good, or the way we did that, or maybe there's a different way we can monitor process or have check-ins or student conferences. We kept adding and subtracting and adding and subtracting with the model we were working with, because it was responsive to our own experiences and our own reflection on how we could be better. And I think that's a vital component in any good teaching experience. And I think we want to preserve that as much as possible too. And again, I'm totally understanding where the comments are coming from. And I really do get it. I really don't want to pretend like I don't get it, because I do. But just those are my immediate reactions in that way. In terms of knowing what helped me, I think, do things better and better with each successive year, if that makes sense.
So, and and I don't want to monopolize, but I do want to just go back to why I'm doing this curriculum instruction assessment, because we started with curriculum and we ended with instruction. And, none of these teachers can just teach whatever they want. Dr. Hollis can't decide that he's going to do the Renaissance just because he likes it. So there is, and I think we do have work to do in curriculum. And again, I think that's part of my job, is to talk with the teachers and the principals in terms of, what we have in a curriculum, and looking at, updating it in some ways, and just that process of looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it. But then when you get to the instruction piece, that's why I intentionally stole Marzano's topic, and it's an art. And we really need to treat it that way. And I hope you saw that and heard it today. And it's going to be delivered differently. And I think that's okay. So I do think we need, we do need standards, not standardization. You got to have a wheel. You got to have 4 wheels on the car, at least 2. Or you can't drive it. So, and there are things that we need to put in place that we all need to agree to. But instruction of all the pieces, I think, is the most personal and the most artful piece to curriculum instruction assessment.
We're edging up past 11, so I'm gonna no. You don't have to lower your hands. But I think we'll wrap up in a couple minutes. If everybody doesn't mind, I'm gonna let the last 2 questions that the committee members have. Deborah and Larry, I don't know which one of you had the hand up first, so whoever was first, go ahead and do it.
I had it up first, but I'll wait. It doesn't really matter. But I guess Dr. Neely's job is curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and the three of them are very much related. In some ways, he's the assistant superintendent for standards, because what we're trying to do is have our students master the standards that they need to be successful. And in a perfect world, teaching the French Renaissance could bring in the same standard as teaching the American Revolution. Again, if the teacher is passionate about it and makes it exciting, the students are going to benefit from it and learn the standards. But what throws the wrench into it is that the assessments are based on the curriculum. Because if you're asked a question about the American Revolution and you've learned about the French Renaissance, you're not going to know the answer to that question. So it's going to be deemed that you haven't mastered your standards. So I think, again, everything is sort of pushing into assessment, because how we assess the students affects their self-esteem. It affects whether or not they have. It affects their futures a lot. It affects all of that stuff, and to me the hindering block of getting this working. We could provide a curriculum that was more meaningful to some of our subgroups if it weren't for the fact that they're going to be tested on the curriculum that's meaningless to these subgroups. So I think that's where we really need to look, is how we're going to assess our students. And I know some of the assessments are out of our control because we don't make the regents, and we still are required to do it. But that's another that's another issue. Mrs. Brooks can opine on standardized testing better than I can, but this isn't the time and the place. I guess we'll end up doing that next month, anyway.
My turn?
Yes, go ahead.
Let me reflect for 1 second, because Dr. Hollis and Ms. Bacchino spoke about that long-term project, and I don't even know what it is, but I know that it's exactly what you were just talking about, because again, the part of what you want when you decide what's important and you set up a project like that, that's how all the pieces come together. That's how the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment all come together. When you put them together in a project that they believe in, that they know that the students can get to and hopefully master, and that they know the students enough and each other enough to be able to deliver that instruction in a way that students are successful at the project. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, because again, we're going to talk about that at the next meeting in terms of assessment. But there's a lot to be said for backwards design, starting from where you want the kids to end up, and then seeing, well, so what does that mean that we do along the way?
Can I just pick back a little bit on what you were saying, Dr. Mioli? And, if I had hours to talk right now, I'd be able to talk all about the importance of process, right, when it comes to education. And that is a huge deal. And I hope, that is part of your discussion when it comes to assessment, the idea of process, because that's when you learn, right, time management skills. That's when you learn, right, the importance of hard work, right, in order to get to your goal. So please, I ask that you keep the idea of process in mind. Okay.
My turn?
Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things I think that I haven't heard is discussion about the joy of learning, and making sure that we have lifelong learners coming out of our schools. And I think that when a teacher, from my personal experience, but from watching other students when I've been able to be in the classroom as a parent, when they love the learning, you've got them. You've got them. And I'm just wondering for the next topic, if maybe the children who are getting the D's and the F's, are they just not learning? Is there no joy of learning for them? Is it the assessment? So I think that's an important thing to think about, maybe when we go forward, that maybe these kids are learning and they are absorbing, but they're just not having a way where they can show back to the teacher that this stuff has sunk in a way that's meaningful to them. So just a thought. I may be completely off base, but they may be learning more than we know. They're just not being able to show it in a way that they're able to show it. Or they may not be learning. I don't know. There may be a gap there. That's all I wanted to say.
And with that note of a lot to do, Dr. Muley, if Larry, did you have another question? Or is your hand still just up?
My hand is still up because it should be a different color, so I know to pull it down.
Dr. Muley, I think, it's 11:15. We've gone a little long. I'm going to hand it back to you in case you have any final comments, and then I think we should wrap this up.
No, I just want to thank the teachers again, I hope that separating the issues as much as they are intertwined. I hope that will help us with this discussion as we move forward, so that we have a little clearer idea when we start having some difficult discussions. What instruction is, what curriculum is, and what assessment is, and because it's really important that we understand how they influence each other, but also how they are different and that they have different purposes. So I feel good about this, and in terms of that, and I thank the teachers again for sharing that view of their classrooms, and I look forward to the next meeting, because I think what Ms. Brooks just said is going to be a big part of what you see and hear.
Thank you all for coming today and taking your time to discuss this with us this morning. We really appreciate it. With that, we're going to wrap up the meeting. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.